Welcome to Successful Parenting, where we, Jackie Rue and Robin Choquette, share practical skills for families to build resilience and healthy connections. As practicing professionals and parents ourselves, we hope this podcast is a resource for parents to grow, reflect, and learn more about themselves and their children. Our approach is simple, tangible, and most importantly, we lead with compassion for the integrity of the families we serve. This podcast should not be taken as medical advice and is intended for informational purposes only. We love our work, and we can't wait to watch families gain confidence and open themselves up to new ways of successful parenting.
Hello, Robin. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, a great day. How about you?
I am excited about the topic we are going to discuss because I've been doing a lot of work and research in this area, and we have an amazing guest today. I was thinking when my one daughter was young, I remember I had to take a flight from Kuwait to Chicago direct. I think she was real little, and she had some issues when she was younger, and she would cry a lot. I was on a 15-hour flight by myself with her. Yeah, how cute. Well, she screamed the whole 15 hours.
Oh, poor baby.
So, well, people around me looked at me and they kind of, told me to stop her from crying, and they gave me dirty looks. And I just remember as a parent being embarrassed, but also having to detach because I had no control over the situation.
Right.
And I think about that story and how just horrified I felt because I've talked to so many parents that say they have children, maybe a neurodiverse child that, as we know, can often mean difficulties with self-regulation,
Right.
even communication. And as parents, they say it's hard because when they're in public settings, they often have a hard time. Their child might become dysregulated. And they said how quickly others just turn to them and either give them a look or tell them, they need to have better parenting. And it's so different. And I think we don't always really understand what it's like to be a parent of a neurodiverse child. And so
True.
My daughter, it wasn't a neurodiverse child. I just relate because I understand when you're in those situations and people are just looking at you. And because so many parents have reached out to us and requested this topic, I thought no other than Dr. Lauren McArdle to join this conversation today.
Excellent. You're so right in terms of feeling that disconnect or that embarrassment or just that uncertainty, right? I just don't know. Therefore, I feel almost paralyzed is what I hear a lot of parents say in those moments.
Yes. And Dr. Lauren McArdle is Assistant Superintendent for Student Services for Unit District 95, Lake Zurich. She has her doctorate in school psychology and her clinical psychology license as well. She has a wealth of knowledge. She has had tons of different experiences in this area, and I think she's going to bring a lot to this conversation today. She truly is an expert in this field.
Excellent. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Or maybe Doctor, sorry.
No, Lauren is absolutely fine, Robin.
Yes, that's, people do that to me and I'm like, whatever you want to call me, it's fine.
Okay.
Well, and I think, Lauren, one of the things that's so great about you is you do have all these experiences and you're a doctor and you have all these accolades, but you really truly are down to earth and so relatable for families. I think that's one of the gifts that you bring to the table. You do have so much expertise, school and at home. Tell us a little bit about your background and what sparked your interest in this topic we're discussing.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I will try and keep this 2 minutes or under because I could talk all day about my interest in this topic. So I'll go back to high school. I promise it won't take that long, but I always had an interest in service learning and working with people. So kind of right off the jump, I knew I wanted to be in some sort of field where I was working with people, helping out. Also had an early, not sure where this came from, interest in mental health, even in high school. So I declared psych as my undergrad right away and was introduced to a professor who talked to me about school psychology. And it really seemed like that perfect blend of getting some of that mental health support and experience for students, as well as some of that prevention-based piece that I was interested in. How can we work on the front end to give students or families the tools that they need to find success? So I pursued that, ended up at Loyola University where I did my doctoral work in school psychology. My minor, so to speak, at that time was mental health. And then I also did kind of a specialized experience for 2 years where I worked in a therapeutic day school setting and got a lot of experience with neuropsychological assessment. So pretty much everyone there had some form of neurodivergence. And just a really wide range of needs. From there, I also did some postdoc work. That's where I got my clinical psych license. As you mentioned, I've been in a range of settings. So large public schools. I also did a private tour for a little bit where I was a clinical director for a system of private therapeutic day schools. At this point, I am back in the public sector on the administrative end and, chose to follow that path so I could serve and support the greatest number possible from that systems level. So really excited to be here and thank you for the opportunity to chat with you today.
Thank you. Really like that diversity that you're talking about in training, because I think that really enriches the clinician, the individual, when they're trying to support families, because you're able to understand it from several different aspects. Well, let's jump into neurodivergence. There's many disorders. Can you help us to understand neurodevelopmental conditions and explain the different types?
Sure. And, as you mentioned, Robin, there are a ton of different types and different ability levels. And so without going, into every single one, I can focus a little bit on two different kind of camps of neurodivergence.
Okay.
So one being one that has that kind of strong genetic undercurrent. So a lot of different types of neurodivergence do have a genetic underpinning, meaning people are born with whatever that neurodevelopmental disorder is. So if we think about ADHD, which is a pretty commonly known disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that one is one that does have that strong genetic component. And many of the people that have ADHD or ultimately receive that diagnosis were born with it. Mm-hmm. There are other situations, conversely, where a situation or an event can cause brain changes. So for example, if I am a person that has undergone significant trauma, or I've had a serious brain injury, let's say I was in a car accident, I wasn't born with those situations or that scenario in terms of neurology, but following those incidents, my brain is not working the same or functioning the same. The systems aren't talking the same anymore. So then I have, a different processing style, a different learning pattern. I might show up different behaviorally, just a really wide range depending on whatever that neurological impact was.
Okay. Well, that's a good way to think about it.
Would it, Lauren, be even trauma such as emotional trauma, things like that? Could it be traumatic experiences?
Yeah. So I should clarify, not necessarily just a physical trauma or physical incident. Obviously that would result in a brain change potentially, but I might have witnessed domestic violence in my home for, a series of months or years even. And as a result of that, my brain responds to different situations that normally wouldn't be fear-inducing, for example, or anxiety-inducing differently. And so if I'm a student in a classroom, maybe a loud sound, outside the window or in the hallway that for many other students isn't triggering or alarming in any way. But because of my experiences and how my brain is now functioning, I respond differently as a learner. So that would be, one example of an emotional trauma that could have potentially similar effects on the brain in terms of what's going on underneath there.
No, that's helpful. I'm glad that you explained that because I think for many parents, that sometimes is unclear on that trail. What would you say to parents or families? Like, how can they recognize these conditions early on in their child? And do you feel early intervention is really key here?
Early intervention is huge. The earlier we can start to work on and identify some of these issues, the better the outcome potentially is for the child. And so what I say is that if you have a question or a concern, really that first line of defense and one that's pretty widely available for families is their pediatrician. I know sometimes, at least for me, it feels like I am sitting in the office answering questions for like 20 minutes before the doctor even looks at my kid. At the same time, the reason there are so many questions at those well check visits is so that providers can help detect and identify anything that might be going on that is not developmentally typical and start to steer the parent in next steps in problem solving that. So if you have a question, you have a concern, something's not sitting right for you, I would say just ask the question. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be worried about what the answer might be, because that's the reason that those structures are in place.
And if you have that concern and you're talking, and as you said, the early intervention is so important, there's certain types of assessments that could be done. How do parents find the resources for these assessments? And can you tell us a little bit about some of those?
That's a really good question, Robin. If I were not on the school side of things, I don't know that I would have all of this information. And there is a lot of different potential pathways parents could take if they have concerns. I just don't know that they always know how to start or where to go. So let's say that there is a concern, and I'm going to talk about different age buckets or brackets, if you will, and your child is somewhere between 0 and 3. There are early intervention services, or EI, that are facilitated through the state. So that would be the Department of Human Services. Depending on where you live, they're typically coordinated through the county. So I live in Lake County. I would call the Lake County Health Department, and they would get me set up with a screening. And depending on what the outcome of that assessment is, services would be determined from there if my child would be eligible. And those services are free. I should mention that those are at no cost to families. So let's say, I took my 2-year-old, I had some speech concerns, things weren't developing as, one would expect, and they qualified. I might have a speech language pathologist come into my home once or twice a week and work with my child as part of that early intervention process. When you turn 3, the assessments look a little bit different. And then school districts are actually responsible for providing screening and assessment for any concerns that might arise. And so that looks different depending on the district that you live in. But there is typically, information on the website in terms of what that screening looks like. And again, that's another one that's at no cost to families. So if you have concerns, you have a preschool age child, it's the school district's responsibility to conduct whatever assessment might be appropriate given the referral concerns, and then make recommendations from there. And again, depending on what that outcome is from the assessment is what's going to drive those services. And then lastly, you get school age, another free resource. The schools are responsible for identifying any potential concerns, but it goes 2 ways. So if a family has a question or a wondering, or they're just not sure their student isn't coming along the way they thought in a number of different areas, you can approach the school district and ask for an evaluation through the school setting. And that is also a little variable depending on where you are in terms of where a parent's starting point is, but it's typically a school psychologist or a member of a student services team. But if a parent isn't sure where to start, call in the school office or the district office saying, hey, I have these concerns. Can you point me in the right direction? Schools field those kinds of questions all the time, and they would be able to get parents where they need to go.
That's really helpful. I wasn't super aware of the 0 to 3 information and how that all worked and exactly when schools step in, but that is actually really helpful.
Yeah, and actually between the 0 and 3, so 0 and 3 is operated by the state or a state department agency, right? And then schools pick up at 3, and those two systems actually talk. So we're in District 95. We get notified when we've got a kid who's about to turn 3 who's been eligible for early intervention services. So there's also coordination between those two systems.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And we know that each neurodevelopmental condition is unique, right? They don't all look the same. They require a different approach and understanding. What can parents do to arm themselves with knowledge? What can they do? Are there places they can go to get educated? What would you say?
So I would say, building off of earlier conversation about starting with your pediatrician and having that dialogue and or some combination of pediatrician and some assessment, some outside assessment. But once there's that condition that's identified, that neurodivergence, I would say learn as much as you can about it. And there's a ton more research out here today than there was in years past about many, many more types of neurodivergence. So there is a lot of information out there to kind of sift through. There's also a lot more support networks for parents. So I have a child with autism. I can go online and find 3, 4, 5 in my area, whether that's a Facebook group or some other type of support network where I can connect with other families that might be dealing with similar issues as I am as a parent. I guess one caveat to that is that not all online resources or networks are created equal, right? And so,
So true.
Definitely something to be said for the sites you might land on as a parent. So I always say, look for the .org or the .gov instead of the .coms. And, in terms of other parent experiences, those can certainly be helpful to kind of connect with someone else who might have a similar path that they're walking, but know that what works in their home might not work for your child. And whatever advice is given might not translate cleanly to your experience.
Right. I think having that awareness is so important.
Yeah.
Jackie and I talk a lot about parenting tips. And I think one of the ones that we really kind of support families on is really finding, consistency in their parenting, making sure that they do have some structure and understanding and predictability for the child. With neurodivergence, such a broad term, and we've been talking about all the different kind of conditions you've talked about. And in that, there's that huge range of symptoms, behaviors, strengths, and challenges. There's not one single tip, obviously, for raising a neurodivergent child. But are there any general that you can share with our listeners and parents?
Sure. And you mentioned consistency, and that is something that If I had to pick one, that one is really big, regardless of the area of neurodivergence, I will say, because there are so many different types. And when I'm thinking about consistency, that touches a couple of different areas. So that's everything from how different caregivers respond in the home, follow through on any reinforcement systems that are set up, consistent follow through on consequences that the family decides or determines. So, for example, if I'll use my son, Harrison. If Harrison only gets dessert after he finishes all of his vegetables, but I'm the only one that enforces that, and when dad's home, I'll throw dad under the bus. Harrison only has to eat one spoonful of vegetables and he gets ice cream. That behavior that we're trying to solidify isn't going to take hold as quickly if that consistency between caregivers, right? That's a reinforcement example that I gave, isn't there. So the consistency piece is huge. The other piece that I see often and that we give advice on in terms of that parent-school collaboration is that it can be really tempting to say, this isn't working. We're trying a new plan at home and it's been 5 days and I'm not seeing anything different. And let's try this instead. And let's throw something else into the mix. It is really important to see over a series of weeks with consistent implementation if something works or not, right? So for a student or a child in the home to really get used to a new routine or a new setup or a new system of responding to support their needs, it's not going to happen overnight. And it might not happen in 10 nights, right? It might take a little bit longer to take hold. It doesn't mean that it's not working or it's not going to work. So it can be tempting to change course, but I would say kind of stick that out at least 3 to 4 weeks and see what comes of that. A couple of other things. I think it's really important to meet your kids where they're at. It can be frustrating if your child isn't responding in a way that you see other kids responding or that you would think that they should know how to do something at a certain time. But it's important to set some goals and to have them working towards something that they can achieve at that time. Harrison is 5 in my house. It wouldn't be developmentally appropriate of me to ask him to get himself up, to get dressed, to get fed, pack his backpack, and get to the bus on time every day. That wouldn't make sense. So the same is true if you're working with a neurodivergent situation. You have to consider developmentally where that person is at and work to kind of build up to a place and scaffold those skills. And then lastly, I'd say, anything around schedules and routines are one of my fan faves. Everybody does well with schedules and routines, adults included, and that speaks back to that consistency component as well. When kids with different learning or processing styles know what to expect, they practice it, they do it every day, you're going to see more of those expected or desired behaviors and perhaps less of some of the other stuff.
Well, and I like that. And Lauren, I think we've even talked before, and summer's coming, right? And so for many parents, I think, they feel like, okay, my kids just need a break from school. And what happens is when those children don't have that structure and routine, oftentimes they might not see kind of the effects of it in the moment, but when it's time to get back into that structure and routine of school, it can be more challenging. And so we've really recommended to parents to really kind of keep some of that routine over the summer, as well as, really talk to your child's school, find out kind of what behavior plan or what they're doing at school and try to duplicate some of it at home. And just that way you can have some similar routine at home, what it looks like at school. What do you, in addition, think parents can do to partner with school as well as be their child's advocate? Because so often I think parents don't realize that they can, speak up on behalf of their child and even sometimes question some things that the school might be saying.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Particularly if you have a child that has some learning differences, not knowing where to start, not knowing how to enter that conversation is something that parents face quite a bit. And if you're new to the system or to the inner workings of a school, it can seem daunting. But that open communication is probably one of the biggest things that parents can do in support of their kids. From the school perspective, we can act on what we know. And if a parent is having a concern at home, someone comes home and says something's bothering them at school, they've been consulting with an outside provider, all of that is really good to share with the school so we can engage in that problem solving together. I'd also say that, and I know this can be hard sometimes, but having that mindset that everyone around the table has positive intent and everybody's there to be solution focused for that child or that student from the school perspective, entering with that frame can be helpful in what seems like sometimes, like I said, daunting or stressful situations. Mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, whomever lives at home, might have a different lens or frame of reference, expertise in terms of that child's needs as compared to the school. So we might be approaching it from 2 different perspectives, but really everybody's goals are the same. So just having that in mind can help kind of temper some of those maybe stressful or uncomfortable feelings. And then, lastly, I'd offer that we use a lot of different jargon in education, like a lot of acronyms, a lot of different words that you would never hear anywhere else. So if you don't understand from a parent perspective, there's a practice, a policy. I might be walking through an evaluation for special education services for the first time. And I just, I'm not quite getting what the next steps look like for my child. Just ask. We think that we're explaining things really well, but they're second nature to school personnel. So if we have to take the time to slow down and walk through that, we are happy to do so. So all parents have to do is ask. And like I said, with the pediatrician question, don't ever feel embarrassed about it. We want to make sure that parents have that clear understanding of what's going on for their student.
That's so true and so important to think about because parenting's not easy. Right? I mean, it's the most probably difficult thing you'll ever do in your life. And especially if you have a child that has, neurodevelopmental disorders or emotional and intellectual. What would you say to encourage parents and helping them to foster those relationships in their child's school?
I would say in terms of partnership with schools and thinking about how they can work effectively, always setting up that two-way communication, right? And that looks different for every family, and every family has a different preference. Maybe it's a weekly check-in via email. Maybe I'm going to set up a parent conference outside of the once a year parent conference that's already set up. Those things are okay to ask for from that parent perspective. And I always think that it is better to be proactive and to do that information sharing along the way than to have a parent who's sitting and wondering and questioning something and then have that kind of build up over time. It's okay to say, right now, I'm really feeling like I need more information from school and I want to be a good partner. I want to reinforce things at home. Can we talk a little bit more frequently? I would assume 99 times out of 100, the response is going to be yes.
Yeah, just ask.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you. This has been powerful. I think so informative. I've learned a lot in our time together. Thank you so much. I think we're at the point of asking our 3 questions. What do you think, Jackie?
Yes, I think it's a good time.
Okay, here we go. Here are 3 questions that we ask every guest. You may choose to answer 1, 2, or all 3 of the questions. It's your choice. Here we go. Number 1, tell us one of your funny parenting stories. Now, this could be you as a parent, or it could be in your own childhood and something your parents did. Number 2, what TV, family, or movie would you want to be a part of and why? And number 3, what does successful parenting mean to you? What do you think?
All right. So I'm going to start with successful parenting since we were just kind of on that topic. Natural segue. I'll say that, for me, I think that being a successful parent, there's a lot of different directions here. But from the parent perspective, more strictly, it would be me not letting my stress impact my student or my kid. When I say that, I mean that there are plenty of things that I'm sure I worry about that my 5 and 3-year-old could care less about, right? And so keeping those 2 things separate and, working to support them in whatever their endeavors are at that time is really important, right? So Harrison struggles to focus on his homework and he knows it. And so me telling him that, you have 10 minutes to finish your homework and this isn't working, that's not helpful. So, always kind of keeping that in check and keeping myself regulated as much as I can, right? Within some limits is big for me and something that I work on a lot. And then in terms of outcomes, if my kids are happy and they're healthy and they are finding success on whatever that path is that they want, Harrison's really big into garbage trucks right now. So I think he might be something in waste management, also trains. But again, everybody has their different interests, their different passions. It's okay to let that person bloom and blossom into whatever they want to be and being their cheerleader and helping them get there. I would say would be successful parenting. So have I, brought them along and given them the support and the resources that they need to navigate and to achieve whatever that goal looks like. And that looks different for every kid. Very true.
I love it.
I like that too. That's awesome.
And then I'll go funny parenting.
Oh, okay.
Parenting. I'll pick on myself a little bit since I just spent, the better part of a half an hour giving parenting advice. So I talk about consistency. I've got a 3-year-old at home who is struggling to listen and follow directions that folks are given. So I, put my school psych hat on. I've got my sticker chart out, and she just, direction is given. It's clearly stated. It's positively stated. Telling her what to do and what not to do. I'm doing all the things. She just says no. Okay. And that's like her favorite word. She has a very rich vocabulary, but we use that word often. She says no. And then I find myself getting into like a back and forth dialogue with a 3-year-old about why you should listen to your mom and why following this direction is important for your well-being and like I'm like, what are you doing, Lauren?
And Lauren, we've all been there. We've all been there.
Yes.
And then I ended the conversation with, since when let me start over. Since when did because I said so stop being an appropriate response? And, we just left it at that. She ended up ultimately not complying with the expectation and not earning her sticker. But I say it to say, we all make mistakes and no one is perfect. And, particularly if you're working with a child that has some different needs, it can feel really stressful. So just giving yourself some grace, I think, is really important too to being a successful parent. And I'll leave it with that.
Oh, that's awesome. And we talk about that a lot. I like that, Lauren. And it's just learning so much from you as always. But this was really helpful. And I'm just so appreciative that you joined us today.
Yes.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Happy to continue chatting whenever you might want to.
Oh, great. We may take you up on that one. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Robin. And I hope you continue to have an amazing day. And I think this was another great conversation that will help our families.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Jackie.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. And make sure to subscribe and like us to catch our next episode, where we will take you on a journey to find new ways of successful parenting.